Hi, are you considering buying a new build in the UK? Or are you considering using the Help to Buy scheme to buy a new build in the UK? Then you need to watch this video. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down the pros and cons of buying a new build property in the UK, and I will explain personally why I think the cons outweigh the pros.
Get strong.
Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Arjun and this is the Nimble Nomad, the channel where we talk about the tips, tricks and hacks to survive and thrive in the UK, and I share my personal experience with different aspects of life in the UK. In this video, we're going to be specifically talking about the pros and cons of buying a new build in the UK, and specifically I'll be breaking down my own views on why I think the cons outweigh the pros when it comes to buying a new build. Before I get into it, I just want to clarify that I am not a qualified mortgage or financial advisor. So if you're seeking to buy a new build and are unsure about anything that I'm talking about in this video, then I would suggest you seek professional help. This video is purely designed to share my own views and experiences with buying a new build property. So let's get into it. So what is a new build property? A new build property in the UK is a property that's been built by a developer and it's being sold as part of a larger development or a host of properties that a builder has built. These properties are actually fully modernized and they're very different to the typical older houses that you get in the UK that would have been built back in the 1920s. So they come with a whole host of modernization aspects that you would require or would have done as part of a refurbishment to an older property. So these properties will typically have, built-in kitchens and, modern ensuite bathrooms and things like that you wouldn't actually get with a slightly older house or a, traditional house that you can buy in the UK. Now, before I actually get into the pros and cons, I actually want to clarify that I myself have been through the process of trying to buy a new build property, and I have considered each one of these pros and cons before trying to purchase a new build property. So they will definitely apply and these are completely based on my own personal experience. At the end of this video, I'll also explain why I personally don't think the new builds are what they make them out to be. So let's get into it with the pros. So from a pros perspective, you're buying basically a brand new property. So, typically new builds can be sold and are sold by developers. So they're sold directly by the company that has actually built the property. So these are brand new, and everything that you will have within the house will be absolutely brand sparkling shiny new, and nobody would have ever lived or touched it except the builders and the people involved with building the property. So that's the first pro of buying a new build property. The second one, as I explained in what a new build property is, it's fully modernized. So typically in the UK you have different types of houses, and the ones that are built pre-war or during the World War era will be quite traditional, and often they require a lot of modernization. So these are fully modernized. So you will have access to a open plan kitchen, you'll have all the appliances typically fitted in depending on the type of property that you're buying. That there'll be good light and windows that you have access to. So these are fairly modernized properties that you're getting access to. Pro number 3, so warranty and protection. So typically when you buy a new build property in the UK, the property actually has protection that you get with it. That's typically why you're buying a new build property and one of the actual advantages of buying a new build property. So all major new build properties in the UK typically come with a 10-year warranty, which is provided by an independent party that certifies and validates that certification. So in the event of something actually going wrong with the property, so if you have a leaky roof or something breaks, then you can invoke that warranty because the quality that you paid for hasn't actually been met to the standard. So that's one of the advantages of buying a new build property. Pro number 4, you have a lot more options when it comes to actually buying a new build property. So in the UK, when you want to buy a property, you have 3 mechanisms through which you can buy a new build property. Option one is you can get a traditional mortgage from a bank or a lender. Option two is you can get a additional support from the government, which is through something called as help to buy scheme, to buy a new build property. In case you're wondering what the help to buy scheme is and how that works, I've done a separate video detailing all of that. Please click the link above over here. And then option number three is if you have a whole bunch of cash, or if you've had an inheritance of some sort, then you could just buy the property outright. So you actually have a lot more options on the table to actually buy a new build property. One of the advantages of buying a new build property is obviously the help to buy scheme, because the help to buy scheme gives you the opportunity to purchase a property that you typically wouldn't have been able to, because the government is lending you money through the equity loan that they offer. As I said earlier, there's a separate video that I've done. Please click the link above and you can go watch that. The last aspect of buying a new build property is in case the property has not been fully built, then you can choose to have extras or some sort of customization to the property that you're actually seeking to buy. So you can pay the builder or developer and they'll be happy to take your money from you. And you can actually use that opportunity to actually customize some of the fittings. So you might want, a better set of taps, or, you want different types of switches or light fittings. Then all of those things can be added on into the new build property, provided you pay the extras to the developer. So let's get into the cons. So one of the major cons of actually buying a new build property is the fact that you will actually pay a premium for the property. So you'll be paying more for a new build property because typically it's brand new property, nobody's ever lived in it, and because you're going to be the first person to ever live in it, the property ends up having a bit of a premium associated with it. So con number two is actually the really painful sales process that you have to go through. So one of the key disadvantages of buying a new build property is, if it's brand new, is that you're actually dealing with a developer. So because you're dealing with a developer, firstly, you have very little room to negotiate on the price, because if big developers treat property as if they were selling bread or they were selling any other product out in the supermarket. So if you don't buy it, somebody else is going to come along and buy it, and they have the backing and power and the money behind it to actually sell the property to somebody else. So you have very little room to negotiate with the developer unless you're in a sort of a down wave on a property market. The other aspect is the aspect that you will be going through a very difficult sales process. So the sales process can be quite tiring, because firstly, the developer will push you into a corner saying that you need to exchange the property or complete the property sale process within 28 days. In case you're confused about property exchange and completion of sale, I've done a separate video where I explained this. I'll add a link to it above. But basically you have 28 days from the point in which you sign the reservation form to actually completing it. Now that is actually a ridiculous timeline, and it's very difficult to complete it, because typically in England, the average time for completing a sales process is actually 12 weeks. So 28 days is nowhere near that. And developers will often tell you that they'll look at the review the sales process later on down the road, but because they hold all the cards, they will actually push you into completing it within 28 days, which means you could be short-handed in the sales process as well. Third aspect is negative equity. So as I said earlier, you're paying a premium for a brand new build. Now, once you actually buy a brand new build and you actually live in the property value actually dips a little bit. So in your first couple of years, it depends, it's relative to how the market performs, but typically you could end up with negative equity on the new build property. So that's one of the main reasons a lot of people in the UK actually want to go out and buy older houses, because they retain their equity, and as a matter of fact, they appreciate if you made refurbishments to it. So one of the disadvantages of new build property is you'll end up with negative equity, at least in the first couple of years, until the property prices surge further up. So another con is the ability to sell the property onward. So if you buy a new build property in a large development, so let's say there are a lot of flats or houses in the development that you're buying from the builder, then what can happen is when you try and sell the property, it can get quite difficult to sell the property because if the developer hasn't sold all the new builds in that specific development, then there's a high likelihood that they probably still have some brand new properties out for sale, and you're trying to sell your property, let's say after 3 or 4 years, and they still have a new developer. So why would somebody want to buy your used property that you've already lived in, where they can't even invoke help to buy, versus a brand new property where they can get some support from the government and actually buy the property? So it can get a little bit difficult to sell the property. So another disadvantage of buying a new build property is leasehold. So typically, new build properties in the UK are leasehold. So that basically means that you don't actually own the land underneath the property which has been built by the developer. So in the UK, you can either have freehold or leasehold. And typically, leasehold is, a property has been built on that specific land and that lease lasts for a specific amount of time. So that time can be anywhere from 999 years all the way down to 95 years. Obviously 999 years is great because you have a longer lease and therefore you have the property for a lot longer. A couple of disadvantages specifically associated with the leasehold is you can't actually make any changes because leasehold actually comes from the feudal times, and basically the way the contracts are written out for leasehold properties is you can't actually make any external changes to the property. If you want to make any changes to the internal parts of the property, such as changing a doorbell or building a new fence, then you need to pay the developer for requesting access or just permission for it. So you might pay £60 just to change a doorbell. These are actual factual numbers, by the way. And you might pay £300 for changing a fence if you're buying a house with a garden. So there are additional costs associated with it, and you can't actually change the property that you've paid your hard-earned money to buy from the new builder. Also, by the way, when I say you can't make changes, you even need permission to have a pet. In the UK, actually, owning a dog is a pretty big thing. So if you wanted to have a dog in your flat or your house, you would actually need permission from the developer. And that would cost money as well, by the way. Which brings me on to my other con, which is hidden additional costs. So new builds, and because they're leaseholds, and especially if they're built on large developments with communal areas and stuff like that, have a lot of additional costs. So the number one cost typically, which is massively disputed at the moment, is a ground rent. So when you buy a leasehold property, because you don't actually own the ground underneath the property where the property has been built, you have to pay a rent to the owner of the ground, which in this case is the developer. Now this concept comes from the feudal times when you used to have landlords and lords who owned land in England, and that has transitioned on to new builds and developers now. So this ground rent typically used to be a token amount of £2 or £50 in the early days, but now developers actually ask for £400 a year. That was my own personal experience when I was trying to buy a new build. Up to £400 a year in ground rent fees every year for the duration of the leasehold. Now that's not it. The ground rent actually increases every 10 years. And if you read the sales terms and the deed that you will get when you are trying to purchase a new build, the terms that they use is that every 10 years, the ground rent will appreciate in line with the RPI, and there's typically no maximum ceiling. I'll get more into this in another con, by the way. Now, other hidden cost that comes with a leasehold property is the service charge that you have to pay. So because there's communal areas such as a garden, such as open corridors and things like that, you have to pay a service charge to maintain these, including lifts and things like that. And this is quite expensive depending on the type of build that you, or property that you're living on. It can almost be as expensive or more expensive than 1 month's mortgage payment that you might be paying. So a typical example is for the new build that I was buying. In the first year of the leasehold that I was buying, the service charge was almost £2,000, and that had a separate fee also for the parking that I was purchasing with the new build property that I wanted to buy. So this is really expensive, and you just need to consider all of these additional costs that come with buying a new build property. So another con is onerous terms. So onerous terms basically refers to terms or requirements that have been set out within the deed or the contract with the new build, which can actually make your property unsellable or a burden to the buyer of the property. Now what I'm referring to is specifically, let's just take the example of the ground rent that I just talked about. So the ground rent has no maximum ceiling. It appreciates or is revised every 10 years with the in line with the RPI index, so retail price index. Now that has relatively stayed, stable, but sometimes developers are sneaky in there. So what they can do is they can sneak in, terminology which says that, the ground rent will double every 10 years. Now you might think, at the face of it, that doesn't sound too bad, but if you're paying £400 a year right now, in 50 years, that £400 is going to probably be £10,000, and that can probably make your property unsellable. So these kind of onerous terms, if they're included, makes the property very, very difficult and possibly a liability as opposed to an asset in the future. And typically developers are very hesitant or very resistant to actually putting a cap or ceiling on the ground rent requirement that's included within the sales or deed that you actually sign. I'm just using ground rent as an example. There could be other onerous terms which make it very difficult for the buyer to maintain or sell the property onward if they want to. So the next bit is build quality and snags. One of the pros that I talked about was, you're buying a brand new property, it's absolutely brand new, nobody's ever lived in it. But one of the big cons with buying a new build property actually is the fact that when you buy the new build property, it's sometimes not built to a great standard. So in the UK, like I said, big developers build these properties. They're just trying to sell them and move on. They don't really care if, there's shoddy jobs being done. So there can be situations where you have tilted walls, or you have, angled, walls, or, corners, or you have shoddy paintwork, or handles are breaking. And it can be quite difficult to actually get them to fix these, or you find them after you've moved into the property. There are some pretty bad horror stories out there, but I'm not going to go into those, but it's just something to be aware of as a factor when you're considering buying a new build property. And so the final con, right, I'll just leave it at that, is the after sale support and the warranty invocation. So, I talked about snags and issues and things like that, but obviously you're thinking, well, you talked about warranty being in place, so why can't I just use the warranty? Actually, the warranty that you get, that 10-year warranty that you get, is really difficult to invoke it. So you have to go through this really trying process with the actual developer, telling them that this is an issue and this is broken, or you need to fix it, and they probably will argue back with you. And then only if they absolutely refuse and disagree is when you can get the warranty guys involved. Now, I've heard some stories. I don't personally have this experience, but I've read quite a bit that apparently the guys who give these warranties are in bed with the developers, because it's you scratch my back, I scratch yours sort of a concept. Because if the warranty guys give them a headache or hard time later on down the road, then the future developers won't actually use them as a warranty provider. So it can be difficult to actually get the warranty guys to get involved and get them to help them fix the issue that you've got at hand. So that's the whole snapshot of all the cons that you can think of. So I mean, I've just laid down the pros and cons. Clearly, for me, from my own perspective, the cons outweigh the pros. I went through this whole process of trying to buy a new build property. That property actually process fell through. I'll explain that in a separate video, but and it was because some of these issues actually realized. But I went through the entire sales deed document line by line, word by word, and I have found so many holes in the process which can really pin the buyer of the property into a corner. So my own personal view on new build properties is a bit jaded. Ultimately, if you're watching this video is just providing you a perspective. You obviously need to make your own decision, but just based on my own personal experience, I would really highly recommend you stay away from new build properties, just because of the complexities and the cons outweighing the pros with a new build property. So that's it, guys. That's all I wanted to talk about in this video. I'd love to hear from you guys on what you think is a pro versus a con. Have I missed anything in the video? Whether you agree, disagree with the points that I've talked about. If you've got any thoughts, please leave a comment in the section below, and make sure to smash that like button and subscribe so that you get notified each time I release a new video. I launch new videos every Sunday. And I'll see you in the next video. See you. Bye.